Hi guys, it's Carrie Einck
and Sarah Norris from the Star Institute, and today we're going to be talking about SPD in schools.
Yeah, so with the individuals we work with, we know that when you have SPD, you have challenges in your daily life and in your occupational performance. So that includes home-based activities and school-based activities. So typically when we're working with parents, children, adolescents, we strongly recommend that there are services in both private settings and school-based settings.
But what we know is that it can sometimes be tricky to get services or supports put in place at school. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what that process looks like so you can be a little bit informed if you're just starting that process or you've been frustrated with that process so far. So we're going to be talking about things like response to intervention, 504 plans, and IEPs.
Yeah, so an IEP stands for an individualized education plan. And so what that is it's a program set up in a school that's individualized for your child in order to provide direct services, maybe collaboration between team members in the school, and goals for the school year that relate to their educational program to help them progress in kind of a one-to-one or small group setting. A 504 plan is more of a medically based plan, and it relies on a medical diagnosis in order to provide services and, again, collaboration for your child in the school. Response to intervention, RTI, is something that was set up in the schools as more of a prerequisite of looking kind of more globally. It's before any individualized programs would be set up. And what it's trying to do is help out kids who are kind of borderline, having some issues, but don't need a full plan yet. And so it's ways to kind of bump up their progress before they would have to get an actual program.
So RTI is something that not every school system has included OTs in historically. It's still something that school systems are kind of implementing in their own ways. But essentially what response to intervention is supposed to do is figure out which students are at risk for having academic challenges. And so a lot of times it's either the teacher or someone who's involved in the classroom who has seen the child in the classroom who says, listen, I think we might need to think about looking at supports. So there's different, what they call tiers of interventions. And part of response to intervention is trying to implement research-based interventions to every child so that every child can access the curriculum and be able to be successful. So that's the tier one of just making sure everybody's getting these good supports. But then they identify children that need some differentiated instruction, and they might need to have a small group. They might need to be pulled out for a little bit of a activity with other children. And then there's also tier 3, which is even more support. So that might include some classroom accommodations, some specialized assignments and things like that, but still all within the regular education classroom. And then tier 4 is where things start to spill over into an IEP or a 504, where they need specialized instruction by someone who knows how to give differentiated instruction on a smaller group basis, more consistent basis with other children that also have similar challenges. So again, it depends on your school system, how they implement that and who's involved in that process. Some of them call it an educational support team, where they will pull in the teacher, some administrators, possibly some of the support staff like counselors and therapists to figure out how to support these children. But, you know, they all have different makeups. Some of them have school psychologists. Some of them do include the parents in the process. So it's going to differ in your state, but it's usually where you're most likely to get services that are going to make differences for those kids that are, like Carrie said, kind of on the line, that they might not be failing yet. They may not be at risk for being held back a grade. It's just that they're needing a little bit of extra support.
Yeah, and so what do you do if you're getting consistent emails from teachers, you're getting phone calls, you're seeing your kid falling behind? What do you do if some of those supports are in place and you're saying, okay, I think that we might need some evaluations in the school. I think maybe an IEP might be appropriate. What does that look like? And that's a conversation that I find I have a lot with parents, even in this private setting. Prior to coming here, both Sarah and myself were school-based therapists. So, a lot of us working here have worked in the school some, so we feel comfortable having those conversations. And I think the importance of working in SPD is that we know the 504 and IEP process isn't exactly easy with SPD. So an IEP, in order to qualify for an IEP, you have to have significant evidence that that your child's performance is having a negative impact on their learning. So things like academic testing, even fine motor testing, gross motor testing, handwriting assessments, those can be really easy ways to get standardized scores and for the school to say your child is falling below the average range of other kids in the class. When we're looking at sensory processing, we don't necessarily have those standardized objective scores to show that your child is sensitive to touch, that your child is sensitive to auditory input, that your child doesn't like it when other kids graze up against them in class, and that's causing these meltdowns that then end up ruining the rest of their school day. A lot of times what we see is that the kids with SPD are often really bright individuals. And so their academic testing is looking good. Their teachers are saying they're really bright kids. Their testing scores look good. And so what do you do if your teachers and the support staff are saying, well, these standardized scores are saying that they don't qualify? Another option is doing questionnaires and filling out questionnaires such as the sensory profile. The sensory processing measure is another form that is used in the schools a lot. Unfortunately, some of these scores aren't standardized enough for the schools to say, yes, this is evidence enough that your child warrants service.
And I think an important thing to keep in mind is the framework that school therapists and educators use when looking at a child's performance. They're specifically looking at educational impact. So if the child is bright and is able to come up with the right answers and pass, then they don't really warrant services, because what the school system is intended is that you have free and appropriate access to public education. And there is a lot of things that they've put into place so that really the individuals with the significant disabilities are the ones that are getting those extra supports. So it can be hard when you have either a hidden disability or a very mild disability to get supports. And so an IEP may not be feasible because they have certain categories, and they have to qualify in at least 2 different categories to be really delayed from other kids, and we know that that's not always the case. But we do know that there are definite ways that they struggle. And so figuring out, well, how do we get help when the IEP didn't work? And for some kids it will, because there could be some behavior or some language or some motor things that pop up too in addition to the sensory. But you cannot qualify for an IEP just because of sensory challenges. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. So the other option is a 504 plan that can get you accommodations. But again, you need to have a medical diagnosis for that. And the way things stand right now is sensory processing disorder is not a recognized medical diagnosis. Doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that the legislature has not caught up with what the research is showing and what we know to be a really legitimate thing. So the pediatrician can't say SPD is the diagnosis and he needs a 504 plan because of that. They could definitely qualify for another recognized diagnosis that's similar. So obviously, if your child has autism or ADHD, it's much easier to get a 504 plan in place. But if your private occupational therapist and your pediatrician are able to work together, you might be able to find one that does work. One that's come up lately in our conversations here at STAR is developmental coordination disorder. But there's other ways that you can get a diagnosis that the school system will recognize.
Yeah, and so a big thing that I always encourage parents to do is, if you have a private occupational therapist, utilize them. with the school. A private occupational therapist has the advantages of knowing your child for, all of these sessions that they've been working one-on-one with. They really know the sensory impact in the home and in the clinic, in the community. And so they can really be a good tool to use with a school-based OT and with an IEP team or with a special education team to kind of work with them. They can be an advocate. I always like to tell parents, you're not alone in this. We've worked with many families of working with different school systems around the nation to figure out, okay, well, here's what we know what your child needs. And so how can we work with the school to get it at whatever tier makes sense for the school? There are also educational advocates in school systems that parents can work with individually. Again, these are individuals that know the IEP system really well. Working in the schools and sitting in those IEP 504 meetings, I know that they're very distressing and they're very quick moving and they can be very overwhelming at times. So having individuals in the room or talking to you ahead of time to kind of let you know what to expect, what your rights are as a parent, that you're a part of the IEP team just as much as the case manager, the IEP, or the special education teacher, the general ed teacher. And so finding those people who are on your team in the school system can be really helpful. And acknowledging that private OT is going to be very different than school-based OT if your child does receive it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing for parents to understand is the difference between school-based OT and private OT. School-based OTs are really, their job is to support children at school so that they can access their curriculum. And so they are looking from an educational lens of, can he write? Can he stand in line? Can he hang up his backpack? Can he follow two-step directions? So some things that we do work in private therapy are considered in school-based therapy, but not everything. So we're, in private therapy, more able to look at the home impact on things. So your child gets in the car at the end of the school day and is having a meltdown because it's been such an overwhelming day for them. That's something that I think the educational team needs to know about, to understand, but they also are not necessarily going to be able to address that. So private OTs are able to look at the bigger picture and they can absolutely support what's going on in the school, but the implementation looks much different.
Yeah. I often educate parents on the most recent research that's come out in school-based OT looking at sensory-based challenges. And what it shows is that consultative measures in the school and consultative services, so that means an OT talking to the teacher, an OT talking to a paraprofessional, an OT talking to another member of the team, so kind of more of that collaborative approach is actually showing that it's more beneficial in the schools than an OT taking your child and pulling them out and trying to do little bits of sensory-based work, pulling him out of the classroom. And so research is showing, let's keep the kids in the classroom, let's educate the teachers. And I think that's such an awesome role that school-based OTs have, is they have the ability to educate those individuals in the school. I think as private therapists, our primary job is to advocate and educate parents and all of those people in their lives. And school-based OTs are in the schools. They're forming relationships with the teachers. And so a lot of times I'll tell parents it's going to be a little bit different, but actually that's probably that's what the research is showing is the best supports for your child in that setting.
And I think the one thing that I want to make sure parents understand is that educational OT does not replace private OT. They're completely different. So in private OT, there is a need for that intensive interaction with the therapist to help develop skills. At school, what's really needed is someone that's there to advocate and support the sensory needs that your child has within that setting. So private OT can consult and talk to the team about these are the supports that we know might be helpful for this child. They can do school visits that the parent pays for and give recommendations to the team. But as far as the implementation of services, like Carrie was saying, the most effective way to handle sensory challenges is at school is to help them cope and to help them get through the day. when they're there, they're supposed to be focusing on learning. And that's the job of the OT, is to make sure that there's not an interruption in that because the child is uncomfortable. So just trying to make that environment as welcoming to all students, and thinking about not just giving your child the special equipment that makes them stand out and look different, but figuring out how can we structure this entire classroom to support all of the children in it, including your child who does have those challenges. So I think thinking about, as a parent, what you should be thinking about when it comes to school, your role is really, really important. And you're the one that spends the most time with your child, and you're responsible for making sure that their needs are being met across different settings. So it's a big job and it's a big responsibility, and sometimes you can feel like you don't know what to do. And there's so much conflicting information out there. So I think having a relationship with someone who can help you through that process, whether your pediatrician understands the school system, whether your private therapist understands the school system, or whether you find an educational advocate that you can hire to help you figure it out, is really important. And it's going to make you feel much more confident about how you're supporting your child.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that, thinking about who's on my team in all these settings, and I think that's really our takeaway message for you, is you don't have to be alone in it. There are many professionals out there, and every setting looks a little bit differently, and really advocacy and education is really the important message.
Yeah, it can feel like you have to fight for your child's rights, and in a way you do, but you'll find that the people that work with your child in private therapy as well as at school want your child to succeed too. And coming at it as a team and figuring out how to solve these problems as a team is really the most effective way to make sure your child's needs are being met.
Yeah, so our symposium is happening at the end of next week. Within the symposium, we have some specific courses targeting the school system and strategies at school, which I think is going to be really exciting, as well as some of the research talking about SPD and some of other realms of OT and SPD as well. So I know that there is still options to get online tickets to watch it live.
Yeah, so we'll post, not to watch it live, but to watch it after it's been recorded. So we will be recording the sessions, and you can get a ticket to watch them once they're released. The other thing that I think is really exciting is that we're getting ready to launch a new initiative that's, you might have seen on our Facebook page or come through your email about some exciting things that are going to be happening. So keep your eyes open. Monday is the big day. So we're really excited and looking forward to sharing that with you guys.
Thank you so much. Ask any questions in the comments or share any resources that we have. We love to hear from you.